When the legal system strips away everything you spent your entire life building, you learn a brutal truth. Justice is just a commodity, bought and paid for by men in expensive suits. The powerful men who backed me into a corner thought they had won. They laughed at my only remaining asset, a rotting cabin on a worthless swamp. They had no idea this very mud would become the graveyard for their $10 billion empire. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Audrey Snyder. I am 38 years old, and my entire existence is currently packed into the trunk of a dying sedan, fighting its way through a torrential Washington downpour. The heavy rain battered the windshield without mercy as I navigated the winding, treacherous dirt road toward Oakhaven Lake. With every mile that separated me from the city, the heavy weight of my ruined life pressed down harder on my chest. The rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers served as a grim metronome, reminding me of the judge's gavel striking the sound block in courtroom number 4 just 3 weeks ago. That was the day the legal system finalized the theft of Novaris Tech Solutions. I built that company from a freezing garage startup into a Silicon Valley contender. I poured my 20s and most of my 30s into every single line of code and every late-night strategy meeting. But a convoluted intellectual property lawsuit, meticulously orchestrated and painfully public, stripped it all away. The loss of my life's work was devastating, but the true agony lay in the identity of the executioner, Julian Vance. He was my partner in business and my fiancé in life. Julian was the man I trusted implicitly, yet, behind my back, he had systematically sold me out, aligning with faceless corporate titans to engineer my downfall. He fed them trade secrets, testified against me with manufactured evidence, and forced me into complete bankruptcy. When the dust settled, Julian walked away with a massive payout, and I was left staring at a court-ordered debt of over $2 million. Now, my only refuge was a decaying wooden cabin on the edge of a remote, unforgiving swamp. It was the absolute last asset attached to my name, inherited from my Uncle Arthur. He had passed away 2 months prior in what the local authorities hastily classified as a tragic fishing accident. I always had my doubts. Arthur was a cautious man, and the lake was his second home. When my exhausted car finally rolled into the muddy driveway, the dim headlights illuminated my grim reality. The cabin was miles away from any neighboring town. It stood crooked, boasting rotting exterior wood and a sagging roof that looked ready to cave in. Pushing the front door open, the floorboards groaned in protest under my boots. The air inside was freezing, suffocating, and thick with the heavy stench of damp mildew and years of neglect. It was a miserable, forgotten place to hit rock bottom. The storm intensified aggressively as the evening dragged on. The wind howled furiously through the towering pine trees before violently snapping the main power lines. Plunged into absolute, inky darkness, I managed to light a single, flickering candle. That was when I heard it, a distinct, deliberate rustle at the front entrance. I turned my head just in time to see a crisp white envelope being slid forcefully through the narrow gap beneath the front door. My heart slammed against my ribs. I rushed forward, tearing the heavy door open, but there was only the black, howling wall of the storm outside. Whoever delivered it had vanished into the shadows. I picked up the damp envelope, locked the deadbolt, and brought the paper to the candlelight. Inside was a formally drafted offer to purchase the property. The figure typed at the absolute bottom of the page made my breath hitch in my throat. $3 million, in pure cash, for a rotting cabin sinking into a worthless swamp. It made absolutely no logical sense. A sudden, loud knock on the door startled me so badly I dropped the document. I hesitated for a long moment, gripping a heavy iron fireplace poker before slowly cracking the door open just an inch. A man stood on the porch, drenched and weathered, his sharp eyes cutting right through the gloom. "I am not here to hurt you," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble over the chaotic rain. He stepped forward slightly into the faint candlelight. My name is Silas Thorne. I live in the woods on the other side of the lake. I used to be an investigative journalist. I tightened my desperate grip on the cold iron poker. What do you want? He glanced down at the white envelope resting on the floorboards, then looked back up at me with chilling, undeniable intensity. They know you are here. Listen to me very carefully. Audrey, at all costs, do not sign any paper they give you. Before I could demand an explanation or even ask how he knew my name, Silas turned away and disappeared back into the relentless downpour. I did not sleep a single second that night. I sat rigidly in a chair facing the entrance, the iron poker resting across my lap, waiting for the dawn. When the gray morning light finally broke through the heavy clouds, the storm had moved on. I stepped outside to assess the property in the daylight, my boots sinking deep into the thick mud. That was when I saw my car. All 4 tires were violently slashed, the rubber completely shredded to pieces. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me as I slowly turned around to look back at the cabin. Scrawled across the front window in thick, dripping red spray paint were 3 terrifying words: sell or disappear. The red paint was still dripping down the glass when the low, heavy hum of high-end engines broke the morning silence. 3 massive, pitch-black SUVs crawled up the muddy driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the bleak, overcast sky. They parked in a synchronized formation, effectively blocking my ruined car. From the lead vehicle stepped a man who looked completely alien against the backdrop of the dying swamp. He wore a flawless, charcoal-gray bespoke suit, his shoes immaculately polished despite the puddles of dirty water. I recognized him instantly from the financial news networks, Marcus Sterling. He was the chief executive officer of Sterling Crest, a real estate conglomerate worth billions of dollars. He approached the porch with an easy, predatory smile, 2 massive men in dark suits flanking him. I stood my ground in the doorway, the heavy iron poker concealed just behind my leg. Audrey Snyder, Marcus said, his voice smooth and deeply resonant. I apologize for the unannounced visit. I hope my associates did not frighten you too badly last night with their aggressive delivery methods. He casually glanced at the slashed tires of my sedan, his smile never faltering. What do you want, Marcus? I demanded, keeping my voice dead level. He brushed a stray raindrop from his lapel. I am a man who appreciates efficiency. Audrey, let us skip the pleasantries. You are currently drowning in over $2 million of court-ordered debt. Your bank accounts are frozen solid. Your credit score is non-existent. You have exactly 0 prospects of ever rebuilding Novaris Tech Solutions. I am here to throw you a life preserver. He gestured toward the rotting cabin. $3 million, cash, transferred into a secure offshore account by noon today. It is more than enough to clear your debts and start a quiet, comfortable new life far away from Washington. Why? I asked, my grip tightening on the iron handle. Why would a billionaire personally drive out to a worthless swamp to overpay for a condemned shack? Marcus took a single step closer. The friendly veneer vanished, replaced by something cold and absolute. Because I want it, and when I want a piece of land, I acquire it. Do not let pride blind you to reality. You have absolutely nothing left to fight with. The answer is no, I said, staring directly into his dead, calculating eyes. Get off my property! Marcus stared at me in total silence for 10 agonizing seconds. He did not yell. He did not threaten me overtly. He simply gave a slow, measured nod. I admire your spirit, Audrey, but spirit does not pay off creditors. You will change your mind. He turned and walked back to his vehicle. The SUVs reversed out of the mud and disappeared down the road, leaving behind a suffocating, heavy tension in the air. As soon as they were gone, Silas emerged from the thick tree line. He carried a heavy canvas bag and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. He looked at the fresh tire tracks, then at me. Marcus Sterling, Silas said, his jaw tight. If he is out here personally, this is not just a standard real estate acquisition. Your uncle stumbled onto something massive, something Sterling is desperate to bury. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Arthur's death was not a tragic fishing accident. He was murdered. "We need to find out what Arthur knew," I said, throwing the front door wide open. We tore the cabin apart. For 3 solid hours, we searched every drawer, checked behind every moldy painting, and inspected the structural beams. Nothing. The place was exactly what it appeared to be, a rotting retreat for an old man. Frustrated, I sat down heavily on the bottom step of the wooden staircase. The board beneath my boots shifted with a hollow, unnatural creak. I froze. I looked down, noticing a faint, barely visible scratch mark along the edge of the wood, as if it had been pried open repeatedly with a metal tool. "Silas," I called out. He rushed over, pulling a heavy tactical knife from his belt. He wedged the thick blade into the seam and pulled upward with all his strength. The entire stair tread popped loose, revealing a dark, narrow shaft descending into the earth. A rusted metal ladder led down into pitch blackness. Silas clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight, and we descended carefully into the damp, freezing air. The hidden basement was completely reinforced with concrete and thick steel pillars. It looked absolutely nothing like the home of an old, retired widower. The walls were lined with highly advanced geological surveying equipment, sprawling topographical maps of the surrounding valley, and core sample drills. "Arthur was not just a guy who liked catching trout," Silas whispered, running his hand over a heavy-duty seismograph. "He was a veteran geological surveyor." At the very back of the bunker, resting on a sturdy metal workbench, was a strange, blocky object carefully wrapped in thick, silver anti-static insulation. I pulled the heavy layers back, my heart racing against my ribs. It was a custom-built, miniaturized server array. Using the portable generator Silas had brought from his own cabin, I wired the power cables and flipped the switch. The cooling fans whirred to life, and a green glow illuminated the dark bunker. I connected my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard with the instinctual muscle memory of a seasoned software engineer. But as soon as the interface loaded, my stomach dropped. The screen flashed red, demanding a decryption key. "Can you open it?" Silas asked, leaning closely over my shoulder. I analyzed the chaotic code cascading across the terminal screen. It was a military-grade, polymorphic encryption algorithm. It was specifically designed to actively scramble its own security keys every 60 seconds. "It is incredibly complex," I muttered, a fierce, burning determination finally replacing the cold fear in my chest. But they forgot one crucial detail. I am the one who writes algorithms exactly like this for a living. For 48 straight hours, the cold bunker became my entire world. The rhythmic clacking of my keyboard echoed off the reinforced concrete walls as I waged a relentless digital war against the polymorphic encryption. I was surviving on bitter black coffee and sheer adrenaline, but while I fought the battle underground, Marcus Sterling was tightening the noose above. The psychological warfare escalated aggressively. On the second afternoon, my phone vibrated with an automated alert from my last remaining bank. My emergency checking account had been frozen pending an anonymous fraud investigation. The available balance read exactly $0. I was officially starved out. Then came the nights. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Silas spotted them. 3 men wearing dark tactical masks, creeping through the thick brush near the water's edge. Silas did not hesitate. He fired a single 12-gauge warning shot directly into the trunk of a massive pine tree. The intruders scattered back into the shadows, but the message was crystal clear. Sterling was losing patience. "They are probing our defenses," Silas muttered, reloading the shotgun with a sharp clack. "We are running out of time. Audrey." "I am almost in," I replied, my eyes burning as I stared at the cascading lines of code. The security algorithm was brilliant, but it was designed by a machine. It lacked human intuition. I found a microscopic flaw in the way the key cycled every 60 seconds, a fractional delay in the handshake protocol. I wrote a brute force script to exploit that exact millisecond of vulnerability. I held my breath, my finger hovering over the enter key. I pressed it down. The screen froze. The aggressive red warning interface shattered into 1,000 digital fragments, replaced by the sterile white glow of an unlocked directory. "Got it," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Silas rushed over, leaning heavily against the metal workbench. I opened the master file. It was a comprehensive geological survey commissioned by Sterling Crest. The title at the top of the document read, Phase 4 Structural Analysis. It detailed the massive, $10 billion luxury urban development currently under construction just 5 miles up the mountain ridge. As I scrolled through Uncle Arthur's meticulous field notes and complex seismic graphs, a horrifying reality began to take shape. The mega project was a catastrophic death trap. Arthur had discovered a massive, highly unstable subterranean fault line running directly beneath the primary foundation of the Sterling Crest development. The sheer weight of the concrete, steel, and glass was acting like a hydraulic press on fractured bedrock. The report concluded with absolute certainty that if the project reached completion, the structural load would trigger a massive localized earthquake. It would cause the entire side of the mountain to shear off. "My God," Silas breathed, pointing at a topographical rendering on the screen. "Look at the trajectory of the projected landslide." I traced my finger along the digital map. Millions of tons of rock and debris would funnel straight down into the neighboring Oakhaven Valley, a valley home to over 3,000 working-class residents. It would be a total massacre. I opened the cross-reference coordinates, matching the fault line to the local property grid. A blinking red dot marked the absolute epicenter of the geological fracture. My blood ran ice-cold. "It is here," I said, my voice trembling with realization. "The epicenter is directly beneath this cabin. This swamp is the only access point to the main fissure." The pieces violently slammed into place. Sterling did not want this land for a vacation home. He needed to secretly pump thousands of gallons of industrial stabilizing resin deep into the earth to temporarily patch the fault line. And he had to do it before the Federal Commission arrived for their mandatory site inspection in exactly 14 days. If the inspectors saw Arthur's data, the project would be condemned, and Sterling would face criminal negligence charges. I kept digging through the server, driven by a dark, consuming necessity. Deep within a hidden partition, I found a folder labeled Personal Correspondence. It contained an encrypted archive of emails between Arthur and a third-party consultant. I cracked the folder open. The name on the receiving end of the emails made the breath vanish from my lungs. Julian Vance. I clicked on the first message, dated exactly 8 months ago. Arthur had reached out to Julian, begging him to use his tech industry connections to help expose Sterling's fraudulent environmental reports. Arthur trusted Julian because Julian was going to marry me. Instead of helping, Julian forwarded the entire conversation directly to Marcus Sterling. I opened the attached financial ledgers. There it was, laid bare in undeniable black and white. A wire transfer for $5 million, routed from a Sterling Crest shell company into Julian's private offshore account. The memo line read, "Acquisition Facilitation." My mind violently rewound through the past year of my life. The hostile takeover of Novaris Tech Solutions, the manufactured evidence, the brutal, humiliating courtroom defeat. None of it was about business ambition or corporate rivalry. Julian had not just stolen my company, he had been hired as a financial hitman. Marcus Sterling paid my fiancé to systematically destroy my life, bankrupt me, and back me into a corner so tight that I would have absolutely no choice but to sell my uncle's worthless cabin to pay off my debts. They killed Arthur to silence him, and then they orchestrated my entire downfall just to acquire a patch of mud. The profound, crippling grief that had suffocated me for weeks evaporated in a single heartbeat. The sorrow of losing my company burned away. The heartbreak of Julian's betrayal turned to ash in the freezing darkness of that underground bunker, standing over the undeniable proof of their conspiracy. Something new and terrifying took root inside my chest. It was an absolute cold-blooded fury. "Audrey," Silas asked softly, watching the dangerous shift in my posture, "what do you want to do?" I looked away from the glowing screen and stared into the dark shadows of the bunker. The helpless, broken woman who had driven up this mountain 2 days ago was dead. They took everything from me because they thought I was a pawn, I said, my voice steady, sharp, and void of all mercy. Now, I am going to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury for those who still had something left to lose. The profound betrayal that should have broken me completely instead forged my mind into a weapon. I sat back down at the metal workbench, my fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. Silas watched me from the shadows of the bunker, his shotgun resting against his leg. "We cannot just go to the police," Silas said quietly. "Sterling owns the local precinct. He probably owns half the federal judges in this state. If we hand this over, the evidence disappears, and we end up in the bottom of the lake." "I know," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "We are not going to the police. We are going to bypass the entire justice system. We are going straight for his throat." I picked up the formal purchase offer Marcus had shoved under my door. I dialed the phone number listed for his lead attorney. I waited through 3 rings before a slick, professional voice answered. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to tremble just enough to sound thoroughly defeated. "This is Audrey Snyder," I said, breathing heavily into the receiver. "Tell Marcus he wins. I cannot take this anymore. I am terrified, and I just want out. I will sell him the property." I paused, letting a feigned sob escape my lips. "But I have conditions. I want the check handed to me directly, and I want Marcus and Julian Vance to bring it in person. Tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. If they do not come themselves, the deal is completely off." The lawyer agreed instantly. They thought I was broken. They thought their psychological warfare had perfectly executed its purpose. The next 24 hours were a blur of meticulous preparation. I did not need to sleep. I needed to code. While I ran Novaris, before Julian stole it from under me, I developed a highly classified, offensive cybersecurity protocol. It was meant to test our own corporate firewalls. It was a digital PEX predator, a self-replicating ransomware designed to silently infiltrate, lock, and consume a network from the inside out. I spent the entire night modifying the source code, tailoring it specifically to recognize and bypass the security architecture of the Sterling Crest conglomerate. I loaded this weaponized code onto a sleek, silver external hard drive. It looked identical to the drive containing Arthur's geological data. The following evening, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the swamp covered in a thick, eerie fog. At exactly 8 o'clock, 1 hour before the scheduled meeting, a single set of headlights pierced the mist. It was Julian. He walked up the porch steps alone, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his expensive designer coat. He knocked softly. I opened the door, keeping my face a mask of exhausted despair. "Audrey," Julian said, his voice dripping with perfectly rehearsed sympathy. "My God, look at you. Look at this place. I am so incredibly sorry it had to come to this." I let him step inside. He looked around the dismal cabin, shaking his head in mock pity. "Marcus is coming," Julian whispered, leaning closer to me like we were still allies. "He is ruthless, Audrey, but I convinced him to let me come early to talk to you. He knows about the data your uncle hid here. If you just give it to me right now, before he arrives, I can protect you. I can make sure you walk away with the money and your life. Please, let me help you." The sheer audacity of his performance would have made me sick 2 days ago. Now, it just proved exactly how predictable he was. "I do not know what to do anymore," I whispered, looking away. I walked over to the small, rickety kitchen table. Resting perfectly in the center was the silver external hard drive. Julian's eyes locked onto it immediately. Hunger flashed across his face, entirely destroying his facade of concern. "Is that it?" he asked, taking a step toward the table. "I just want this over," I said, turning my back to him. I heard the rapid rustle of his coat. When I turned back around, the silver drive was gone from the table. Julian offered me a reassuring, sickening smile. "You did the right thing," he said softly. I will go wait for Marcus by the road. Everything is going to be fine. He hurried out the door, desperate to secure his prize. I watched through the cracked window as he climbed into his luxury car. He pulled a laptop from his passenger seat. Just as I predicted, he was too arrogant and too paranoid to wait. He needed to verify the contents of the drive before handing it over to his master. I watched the faint blue glow of his laptop screen illuminate his face in the dark cabin of his car. He plugged the silver drive into the USB port. Checkmate. He took the bait, I called out to the back room. Silas emerged from the shadows, carrying a heavy military-grade satellite uplink terminal. We moved quickly, setting up the tripod on the back porch, pointing the dish directly toward the clear patch of night sky above the tree line. Thick black cables ran back inside, connecting the heavy dish to the real server array we had hauled up from the bunker. Signal is locked, Silas confirmed, checking the blinking green lights on the terminal. We have a direct, untraceable broadcast pipeline. I sat down at my laptop, my hands no longer trembling. The ransomware was already inside Sterling's network, quietly wrapping its tendrils around their entire financial infrastructure. The satellite was primed. The data leak was queued. All that was left was to wait for the king to arrive, so I could look him in the eye as I burned his empire to ashes. Exactly at 9 o'clock, the heavy rumble of high-end engines broke the eerie silence of the swamp. 4 heavy car doors slammed shut in perfect unison outside. A moment later, heavy footsteps marched aggressively up the wooden steps of the porch. The front door swung open violently without a single knock. Marcus Sterling stepped into the dim, flickering light of the cabin, flanked by 2 massive men in dark tactical suits. Julian trailed closely behind them, clutching his expensive designer coat against the chill. They carried the arrogant, suffocating air of conquerors walking into a defeated territory. Marcus barely glanced at the miserable surroundings. He walked straight to the small, rickety kitchen table and casually tossed a crisp paper onto the scratched wood. I could clearly see the printed words from where I stood. $3 million. It was a certified cashier's check. It is a tragedy you made this entire process so incredibly difficult. Audrey, Marcus said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. You fought a war you never had the resources to win, but I am a reasonable and generous man. Sign the transfer deed, take the money, and you can walk away from this mud pit with your life intact and your debts entirely cleared. Julian stood just behind Marcus's right shoulder. He masked his expression with a thin, practiced veil of fake sympathy, furrowing his brow as if he deeply pitied my situation, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a sickening, triumphant smirk. He thought he had already secured the digital evidence. He thought he had outsmarted me one final time. We know about the underground bunker, Julian said softly, playing the role of the peacemaker. I already have the hard drive, Audrey, but Marcus wants every single piece of paper your uncle left behind. Hand over the physical files, the notebooks, the original survey maps. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Marcus pulled a heavy gold pen from his inner pocket and tapped it impatiently against the table, gesturing to the contract. Sign it, Audrey. You are completely out of moves. I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the $3 million check. Then, instead of reaching for the contract, I turned my back to them and walked calmly over to the kitchen counter. I picked up a chipped porcelain mug and slowly poured myself a cup of black coffee from the glass press. The room fell into a dead, tense silence, save for the sound of the pouring liquid. I took a slow sip, letting the bitter warmth ground me. I turned back around, locking eyes with the billionaire who had orchestrated my absolute ruin. Did you think I lost in court because I was stupid? I asked, my voice dangerously calm and steady. No, I lost because at the time, I did not know what game you were playing. I set the coffee mug down, reached over to my laptop resting on the counter, and firmly pressed the enter key. For 2 agonizing seconds, absolutely nothing happened. Then, the heavy silence was shattered by a frantic, high-pitched alarm echoing from Marcus's jacket pocket. A split second later, Julian's phone erupted with the exact same urgent notification sound. Then the encrypted radios of both bodyguards started buzzing wildly. Marcus pulled out his phone, his confident sneer faltering rapidly as he stared at the screen. The custom ransomware I had embedded on the decoy drive Julian so eagerly plugged into his laptop earlier had bypassed every single firewall in their corporate network. It was a digital apex predator. Right at this very second, the virus was aggressively encrypting the entire global server network of the Sterling Crest conglomerate. It was locking down their trading platforms, severing their international bank accounts, and completely paralyzing over $10 billion in liquid assets. "What did you do?" Marcus demanded, his voice suddenly sharp with raw panic. He frantically tapped his screen, but the device was totally locked, displaying only a stark black background with a flashing red padlock icon. Before he could process the total destruction of his financial empire, the massive 72-inch flat-screen monitor Silas and I had rigged against the back wall of the cabin suddenly flared to life, illuminating the dark room with a blinding white light. Marcus and Julian flinched, staring at the massive screen in absolute horror. Displayed in bright, undeniable detail was the live user interface of a high-speed data transfer. The screen showed the progress bar of the satellite uplink, sending thousands of highly classified files into the public domain. "That is my uncle's original geological survey," I said, pointing to the screen as the file names rapidly scrolled past. "Complete with the seismic charts proving your new mega-project is built directly on top of a fractured fault line, and right behind it are the encrypted offshore banking ledgers showing the $5 million bribe you paid my fiancé to destroy my tech company." Julian turned completely pale, his eyes wide with absolute mind-numbing terror. "Shut it down!" he screamed, lunging forward toward the counter. "I cannot," I replied with a cold, unforgiving smile. "It is currently being routed directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the enforcement branch of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the editorial desks of the 5 largest national newspapers in the country." "Stop her!" Marcus roared, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. He pointed a trembling finger at me, completely losing his polished billionaire facade. "Break the machines. Kill the power right now." The 2 massive bodyguards reached inside their tactical jackets and charged forward, ready to tear the cabin apart with brute physical force. A deafening metallic clack echoed through the small space. Silas stepped out from the pitch-black hallway, the heavy barrel of his 12-gauge shotgun leveled directly at Marcus's chest. The bodyguards froze instantly, their hands hovering over their holstered weapons, rapidly assessing the lethal threat. "I would not take another step," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly threat that demanded absolute obedience. Marcus glared at him, a desperate, feral rage burning in his eyes. "You think a shotgun is going to save you? I have enough money to bury both of you under this swamp so deep they will never find your bones." "Maybe," Silas replied smoothly, his aim never wavering. "But you might want to look at the top of the monitor before you give that order." Marcus's eyes darted upward. Perched discreetly above the glowing monitor was a high-definition webcam. A tiny bright red indicator light was blinking steadily in the dark. "The satellite dish on the roof is not just sending emails, Marcus," I said, stepping out from behind the counter and walking toward them. "We are live-streaming this entire interaction. Right now, there are over 50,000 people watching you threaten to murder me on a public social media broadcast. The number of viewers is going up by the second. They are watching you panic. They are watching your empire burn." Marcus stared at the blinking red light, the sheer gravity of his absolute defeat finally crashing down on him. The unstoppable billionaire was completely trapped in a rotting wooden cabin, stripped of his money, his power, and his secrecy, entirely exposed to the judgment of the world. Marcus snapped, the polished veneer of the untouchable billionaire completely shattered into pieces, letting out a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage. He ignored the heavy barrel of Silas's shotgun and lunged across the small room. He desperately reached out with both hands, intending to smash my laptop and physically destroy the server array. I did not flinch or back away. I simply reached down and calmly yanked the main power cord straight from the wall. The massive monitor went pitch black, plunging the room back into dim shadows. "You are too late," I said, my voice cutting sharply through his heavy, ragged breathing. "The data transfer finished 30 seconds ago. Marcus," before he could even process the absolute finality of his defeat. A new sound pierced the quiet night air above Oakhaven Lake, the distant, wailing shriek of federal sirens. The noise grew deafening in a matter of seconds as a massive convoy of police cruisers and armored tactical vehicles tore down the muddy driveway. Flashing red and blue lights violently illuminated the fog outside, casting chaotic, swirling shadows through the cabin windows. The heavy thud of boots surrounded the perimeter. There was absolutely no way out. Julian collapsed. His legs gave out completely, and he fell heavily to his knees on the dirty wooden floorboards. Tears streamed down his pale face as he looked up at me, his hands clasped together in pathetic, trembling desperation. "Audrey, please," he sobbed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "I will testify against him. I will tell the investigators everything they want to know. I will give you back the company. Just please tell them I cooperated." I looked down at the man who used to be my entire world, the man who had sold my future for a paycheck. I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore, only cold, hollow indifference. "You just destroyed yourself when you brought that hard drive into Marcus's network," I said softly, stepping away from him. "Good luck in prison." The fallout over the next several weeks was absolute and highly publicized. The Sterling Crest empire collapsed virtually overnight. The federal government indefinitely suspended the Mountain Mega Project, and independent structural engineers completely corroborated my uncle's hidden findings. Marcus and dozens of corrupt zoning officials were arrested and denied bail. Julian tried frantically to negotiate a plea deal, but the digital trail of bribery and corporate espionage I had exposed was totally airtight. He received a heavy, multi-year federal sentence for extortion and fraud. Armed with the irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy, my legal team filed a massive countersuit against the frozen remains of the Sterling estate. I received a settlement worth tens of millions of dollars. The very first thing I did was buy back a controlling stake in Novaris Tech Solutions, immediately firing every single board member who had conspired with Julian. The second thing I did was establish a fully funded university scholarship program for aspiring geology students, named entirely in honor of Uncle Arthur. 6 months later, the old lake house was no longer rotting. The foundation was heavily reinforced with solid steel. The roof was completely rebuilt and wide. Pristine glass windows looked out over the calm water. I stood on the sturdy wooden porch, breathing in the crisp, clean mountain air. Silas walked out beside me, handing me a warm mug of fresh black coffee. I smiled, clinking my cup against his. I had lost absolutely everything before a corrupt court of law, but right here, in this desolate, forgotten swamp, I had forced them to hand me back an entire empire. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.